Hi everyone, my name is Jenny and welcome back to my creative space. Today's video is going to be me reading books out of my comfort zone and specifically in the genre of horror and thriller. The reason why I wanted to do this was kind of challenge myself. I think in the fact that I kind of assume the worst and most graphic and grotesque ideas of horror, and I know that's not all what the horror genre has to offer, but because of that kind of preconceived notion I have, it makes me very fearful of the genre because I am a major chicken. I do not watch horror movies because the visuals, even like horror movie posters, scares the shit out of me. So like I can't do it. But a few of my friends had read the first book that I am featuring in this video, Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson, and seeing their reactions to the book made me really interested in trying the genre and seeing if maybe I can find a new book that I actually enjoy outside of the realms of fantasy and romance. So the first book that I have, as I said, is Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson. It is a sapphic horror novella, and I thought it would be a great introduction since novella means a little bit shorter. And because I know my friends' opinions of this book, it has prepared me to not be as intensely scared of this one. The second book that I have is Chlorine by Jade Song. I believe it's like a coming of age novel where we are following the perspective of Ren as she's an adult, and she's telling us about her life in high school when she was on the swim team, and like it covers bodily expectations on young women, and it becomes more twisty and turny as that goes. And then the last book that I have is You Know What You Did by KT Win. And this one I'm really excited to introduce because I was asked by the lovely Kayla from Books and Lala to be a co-host of the Literally Dead book club discussion of this book. This is her book club's June pick. And let me tell you, when she messaged me, first I was like, oh my gosh, not Kayla knowing that I exist, because I love her videos. But my thought immediately was, of course, I'm going to co-host with you. I've never done a live stream at all before, so that's a little bit nerve-wracking, but you know, there's always a time to try something once. In You Know What You Did, we follow Annie, who at the beginning of the book, her mother passes away suddenly, and she is trying to cope with the loss of her mother while still being able to be the mother that she is. And there's a lot of her questioning her mental sanity as she spirals when she is suspect in a murder. I'm really excited to read all these books. Do I have a prediction of which one I'm going to like the most? I think because I know a lot of my friends who've read Bloom and really enjoyed that one, and getting to see their experience with it, I think I have an initial bias to enjoying Bloom the most. Hopefully, I find a book that at least is a 4-star. We'll see how it goes, but I will see you when I start the first book and do a bit of a check-in for you. Right, so I am 20% into Bloom, and I thought it would be a perfect moment to go ahead and do my first check-in regarding this read. And what Bloom really is about is our main character, Rosemary, who gets a teaching job in this smaller town. Her life really imploded at where she previously was. Her partner had broken up with her, and she's just really trying to get her feet in the ground and establish herself in this new place. And she goes to the farmer's market where she meets this stall owner named Ash, who does a lot of baked goods, soaps, body care, plants, all sorts of things. And she kind of stumbles in and sees Ash and is like, oh my gosh, this is the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my life. I thought I was straight, but I might not be. And so she kind of like tries a cupcake in her stall and immediately is like, not only is she stunning, but she bakes the most magnificent cupcakes I've ever had. And so this one moment becomes an obsession, and she ends up going to the farmer's market every Saturday to see this woman. So far, I would say I'm reading this through audiobook, and knowing that it's a horror and understanding, like hearing the audio narrator have such a bright and chipper vocal tone kind of makes the situation scarier for me, because I'm like, what on God? Like, when it gets really intense, are we going to be reading in this very casual, bright tone? I am just interested to see where this goes. I will say I want to make a disclaimer that I know the twist of this novella, and the reason being is that a bunch of my friends had read it, and I was like, oh, it's a horror. And, you know, as I said in the intro, I'm not really one to read horror because I am such a chicken that I opened up the spoiler and I saw the end and I was like, oh my gosh, like I did not know the book was about all of that. And you're probably wondering, like, why are you still reading it if you know the twist and it's a novella? With me being such a chicken reading horrors, I don't mind spoilers so much because it like prepares me of what to anticipate in the read, and it allows me to be less anxious. At this point, it's quite a chipper read, and if I didn't know where this was going, I would probably be very stressed. But since I do know where it's going, I think I'm having a much better time. I finished Bloom. I'm speechless. I am so speechless. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I think in the first check-in clip I was talking about whether or not the narrator would kind of change her like vocal tone in how the story goes once like shit hits the fan, right? I think her voice kind of changes to a little bit panicked, but she still continues like reading in her normal vocal tone. Like she doesn't change it to feel any darker. It's more so that the content is darker and you sit there and you're like, holy shit. Where do I begin discussing this book? It's funny because even up to the 40%, there are little details about our character Ash that you start going like, oh, like this is an interesting dynamic that Ro is getting herself into, because this is her first female-female relationship she's ever been involved in. And so there is this level of naivete that she brings to this relationship. And it feels so new and exciting. And like, obviously there's like this sort of obsessive atmosphere that Ro has, because like she just wants to get to know Ash so badly, because like this is something she's never experienced in her life. I'm at a loss for words. I think it is so interesting that I knew the spoilers, like very major spoilers. Basically, I knew the entire story, given me reading my friends' conversations on Discord, right? You know, nothing, no spoiler can prepare you for the experience that you have on your own when you're reading the book. Do I hate the book? Or do I applaud the author for making me feel so viscerally in the short amount of time that I was reading this book? I'm not entirely sure. Like, is it a 1 star? Is it a 4 star? I don't think I could give it a 5. I don't even know what I could give it. I'm just trying to think what to even tell you, because obviously I don't want to spoil this story for you. These two don't have the same plot point, but it kind of reminded me of a more unhinged version of Comfort Me with Apples. So if you are someone who also is kind of newer to horror and you're a little bit iffy about something more detailed and grotesque, I don't think Bloom goes into crazy detail. Like, obviously there's certain things that needs to be told, but it's not like, I don't know, something violent happens and it's described step by step by step, right? It's more so like, this violent thing happened, and you kind of get to piece together all of the things that happen. Whereas with Comfort Me with Apples, it has this kind of eerie atmosphere. I think that's why that this book is reminding me of the other. And so if you are a little bit more squeamish, I would tell you to try out Comfort Me with Apples first. That one's also a novella. It creates such an amazing atmosphere, I think, and it's very creepy and eerie, but I don't think that the horror reveal of it was so detailed and grotesque that I wasn't able to stomach it, whereas this one is a little bit more unhinged. I think a lot more unhinged. I think given the certain thematic of this story, nothing can get more unhinged than that, I don't think. You know, if you know, you know. Nothing can get more unhinged for me than Miss Ash. I don't think I will ever go to a farmer's market. I will never buy a cupcake from a farmer's market stall. I will not buy soap. I will not buy plants. I will not. Oh my god. What to even say? I am so confused, and I am probably speaking so incoherently, and nothing's making sense because all I want to do is stare at a wall and contemplate my life, because I could never imagine writing this story. And I think one of my friends had said that this is inspired by a different story. I don't think that I could say that reference without it being a major spoiler, but like, it didn't affect her that deeply because she knew the prior story, so she knew where the story was going to end up. But let me tell you, like, the last, I think maybe like 5% of the book was a shock. Like, you already knew that the character was in deep shit, but when you get to the last, like, 5%, you are just like, girl. A sapphic horror in June. Happy Pride. It's just like, I'm really glad that I got to read a sapphic horror, and you know, have that representation here in Pride Month. But this is definitely something I'm gonna think about. I'm gonna think about this one for a while. By the end of the year, I'm gonna still be thinking about this. But yeah, first one in this vlog, it obviously gets the #1 spot. I am not expecting the same sort of visceral reaction from any of the other books that I'm reading on this list, but wow. It's gonna be hard to read the other ones without even thinking about this ending, because Jesus Christ. And I'm also recommending it to you so that you can come back to this video and drop a comment and tell me how it went. If I experienced this and I had this kind of reaction, I want people to read a book and feel something. You know what I mean? Like, I think an author that elicits a visceral emotional reaction from you, they're doing the thing. And so, would I say that I enjoy this? I'm not entirely sure. How can you say that you appreciate the craft that the author has created and put out into the world, but you are not really a fan of what happened? You know, it's one of those kind of reading experiences for me. So I think, yeah, you're gonna have to experience this too. So I do recommend it to you. Would I give it a 5 stars? Still unsure. Maybe by the time I finish this video, I will have a rating for you, but it's between a 1 and a 4. I can't believe my thought for this vlog was, let's try out Bloom first because it's a novella and it'll be like quick and snappy and everything will be fine. I am not fine. Will I ever be fine? No. That's it for Bloom. Thank you for having me, Delilah S. Dawson. Congratulations on getting this published. Because if I was a publishing house, I'd be like, no. Denied. You will not be published. Actually, if I was a publishing house, I think I would have it published. Because if I had to read it and be that viscerally shaken, everybody else is going to have to do it too. Okay, well, I'm going to jump into my next read, and hopefully that one goes well as well. So I'm currently organizing my bookshelves, and I decided to take a break, and this would be a great time to check in with you about my read of Chlorine. So basically in this, we are following a kind of adult perspective of our main character, Ren, talking about her experience on being in the swim team when she was in high school. So most of this takes place with her being under the age of like 18. I believe there are elements of like her discovering her sexuality, but also discussions of like eating disorders, and because she's an athlete, her body and her bodily image is very much spoken about. So if those are triggers for you, be aware of those. Thus far, because I'm only 2 chapters in, it's not so detailed. There is one aspect that I kind of read in the 2nd chapter and was like, oh Lord, I don't know if I could read this. And it's mostly that it feels like her swim coach is potentially grooming her. So I had to pause and check with my friends of whether or not it gets more intense than what we've already read. So within the 2nd chapter, our main character Ren kind of shares the kind of like offhand comments that her coach has said, like, oh, make sure you don't wear anything too like revealing, and make sure you come back once you've graduated and tell me about all the men you've dated, and just like really weird and uncomfortable comments. So right now, it's not that I'm triggered reading it, it's more so that I'm uncomfortable, but I am aware that that is the sort of feeling that Jade Song is trying to elicit in her writing. I am interested to see what the discussion about this sort of toxic environment and the heavy expectations on a young woman's body, and we like follow our main character who believes she's a mermaid. And from my thoughts, it's more so an allegory to coping and like feeling you are so alienated from the people in your life, but you know for a fact that this is who you truly are. And we potentially get to see our main character fall into the line of finding her true self. But I'll leave it at that for now. I will check in later. And yeah. Okay, it's the end of the day, and I'm doing a check-in for Chlorine by Jade Song. I made it to the 50% mark. I have really mixed feelings about this book. Not that I don't think the book is good, but I'm definitely not having a fun time reading it. It's so much different from my experience with Bloom because while Bloom was horrifying in its own way, I think it was a much more like unhinged, not very, I mean, it could be realistic, but like it is so far from the scope of reality for me that that horror being so unhinged is almost more enjoyable, if that makes sense. Whereas with Chlorine, we're following Ren speaking about her experience in high school and the traumatic events that she has encountered in her young life. And the horror that is depicted in Chlorine is so much more realistic to the human experience. And especially for me, like as a woman and as like an Asian woman, there are elements to the horror that she experiences that is just like, it is such a guttural feeling. Like, I think the best way that I can describe this horror is that it's so rooted in the kind of disgusting behavior of humanity, and it is just so realistic that like I am indeed horrified, and the book is doing exactly what it put itself out to do. And I really give props to Jade Song for writing this book, and really like it is an important story that she is telling, but it definitely is a difficult read for me. I don't think this is a spoiler at all, but at the 50% mark, there was a scene of sexual assault, and there are on-page details, but it's not as in-depth detailed as I know that certain essay scenes in other books have been written, but I don't think the detail in it changes the fact that our character was assaulted and she is only like a 15, 16-year-old girl, and just reading that scene put like a pit in my stomach, and I immediately was like, I'm putting this down because it's just like one thing after another in this book for her. And like, I really understand why she is dissociating from her experience as a human girl, and she really glorifies the idea of being a mermaid. But wow, this is really horrific. And like, it's horrific in a completely different way from Bloom. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's not a book that I wouldn't suggest people to pick up, but I would say to pick it up with some caution and some caveats of it being very realistic, even though there's that sort of, would I consider it magical realism? Like the idea of her wanting to be this mythical creature, a mermaid, and like that is her way of coping with all of the horrific things that she's experiencing in her day-to-day life of just being a teenager. Like, we've all been there, we've all been in high school and know how like terrifying it is to be a high schooler, and how the events that we go through is so extremely intensified because sometimes that is our first time experiencing those things. And I think that's depicted really well in this book. But like on top of that, we have like her creepy coach, and just now there was that scene of assault from one of her team members, and it's like really hard to like want to continue reading, but I feel like I do want to know how her story pans out. But it's one of those horrors that I'm like, wow, this is a little too real for me. But you know, I'm glad that I am like making space for this book. So I'm definitely gonna take a pause, take a step back, kind of recalibrate myself, and then hopefully I'll be able to finish it tomorrow or maybe the next day. Am I regretting this challenge? No, I think I'm learning so much about horror, and I appreciate that I am giving myself this time to experience a completely different genre, but this has gotten quite heavy. So I'll check in when I have more updates about Chlorine. Hello, friends. I finished Chlorine yesterday night, and I had attempted to film a bit of a wrap up, and I was just not able to articulate what I thought about my read because I just had so many thoughts. And I think the last time I had updated, it was at the 50% mark. And the story had such an emotional and visceral reaction from me that I just needed to give myself some time to process and really think about what I felt about this book. And I don't think I can say that I enjoyed this read. It was so bleak. I think the bleakness comes from the fact that it is such a real story. Like, yes, Ren is a fictional character, but she is very much based off of something that happens to young people in our world. I think the horror that genuinely gets me and like makes me sleepless is the very bleak and realistic horror. So I think for me, Chlorine falls under that, and it makes it a read that is very difficult for me to even express how I feel, because on one end, it was one that was so bleak and difficult for me to read, and the climactic ending of the book had such an emotional reaction from me. Like, I think I almost cried, to be honest, because it was just so much one after the other for Ren, and I just had so much empathy for her. To see that ending scene, or not the ending scene, but to see the scene around like 80% of the book, if you've read the book, you know exactly what I'm speaking about. The fact that she had done what she did and the reaction from people, it was just like speechless. And for me, I think that Jade Song did a really good job discussing these very real but horrific things that happen to young teens. And I feel like it was such an important read for me because it felt like, or she is an author who is shedding light on things that happen to young girls and just young people in general. And I feel like in our society, so often we brush it off as not as horrible or not as bad because it's not this accumulation of violent events, but small micro abuses that other people allow that add up and accumulate. Would I recommend this to a new horror reader? I would suggest you pick it up because I think the topics and thematics of this read are so important for us to discuss, and I think horror is the right genre for this topic to be discussed in order to like amplify the importance of trauma in young people. But it's not a breezy read, so I think that's where my kind of iffiness on suggesting people pick it up would be. But I feel like maybe if you aren't new to horror, this isn't something that is so shocking for you to read. Like, maybe because I am more so a newbie, I am given such a stronger reaction. But all that to say, I think I'm surprised in my final thought about the book, and that being that I think this may be a favorite book of the year. I know, who would have thought that me, certified scaredy cat, would put a horror in the favorite of the year. But right now, I just feel like I need to take a break. Like, who would have thought that me reading Chlorine would make Bloom look like a fun time? That makes me very concerned about myself. Because Bloom wasn't really like fun or silly goofy, but to me, it wasn't that serious. Chlorine, it was really that serious for me. I feel like the author has changed me on a cellular level, and I don't know whether to say thank you, send her a therapy bill, send her some court papers to sue her. I don't know. I don't know what it is. And that's why I'm leaving Chlorine unrated. And that's why I'm gonna leave you here and go read something silly like Veronica Speedwell. But yeah, once I pick up the next book, I will check in again. But for now, I'm gonna go have a silly, goofy time because if I think about Chlorine again, I might spiral. Okay, I will see you guys in a little bit. Hello, my friends. I am back from my palette cleanser read. I ended up picking the second book in the Veronica Speedwell series, I believe, Perilous Undertaking, and that was such a great palette cleanse. I really needed that. And I only really have one book left for this video, You Know What You Did by KT Win, but I've been in a manga reading mood, so I decided let's add an extra read into this and try out a horror manga. And the manga that I'm speaking about is The Summer Hikaru Died. This one, I believe it's for high schoolers, and one summer Hikaru decides to go on this hike in the mountains by himself, and he goes missing for about a week, and his best friend is like, my best friend's dead, we gotta move on. And suddenly Hikaru reappears from the mountain, but Yoshiki has this feeling that Hikaru is not the Hikaru he knows. So that sounds like a very interesting plot point. I have not really seen too many panels of this series. I've only really seen the covers of the manga, and I'm really interested to see the art style. I think that I can finish this manga pretty quickly. Volume 1, I think, only has like 180, 190 pages, but I will be back and I'll let you know how my read goes. Okay, so I finished the volume of The Summer Hikaru Died, and my thoughts are kind of mixed. I think because they live in a more rural town, the translation has this kind of almost southern accent type of writing to the English translation in order to depict a difference in dialect. There's a bunch of different things about like sentence structure and how they depict that dialect that sometimes the conversations were a little bit hard to read through. It wasn't as easy, but it was something that I was able to pick up on within like 3 chapters or so. So it wasn't too bad. I will say I'm not sure if it's the matter of like certain conversations in Japanese being translated into English are missing certain sort of context words, because there were conversations that our main character Yoshiki was having like with an older woman that just felt like I was missing some sort of context. So that was a bit of a hard thing to get into, but I know a lot of the times with manga, volume 1s are so much more of like a very quick snippet of sections in the world that we are at, and like the story really gets its meat in like the second and third volume, which isn't too daunting to think of because it was a really fast read. So I am interested in picking up the second one because there is a little bit of a moment at the end that is a bit of a cliffhanger. So I'm really interested to see how the dynamic between this creature that has taken over Hikaru and Yoshiki will develop into. I will say that this volume wasn't too scary. There were visual moments where I was kind of freaked out, but oddly enough, the unsettling moments for me were a lot of the very basic mundane life things. I have a panel, for example, this one, they're in the classroom like cleaning up before the class starts, and his friend, there is something about the way that his friend is illustrated that freaks me out. Like his face, like maybe it's because the hand anatomy isn't doing what a hand normally does. I don't know, but there's like these moments that are very mundane, and like the texture of the art style just freaks me out. And it's not even the moments that you know are intentionally freaky, it's these moments that are very mundane. And then there's that classic anime frame where they zoom up in the eyes and it's like that goldfish lens kind of thing where like the eye is curved or like the forehead is curved and the eyes are like super zoomed in. That happened and I was like, oh god, like I am so unsettled, and I don't even know if the mangaka is attempting to unsettle me in the mundane aspects of the story, but I got the chills multiple times. I did. I think the visual aspect really boosts my enjoyment of this read. I will say that I am interested again in picking up the second one. I'm not sure when I will, but overall, good reading experience. I am realizing now that all 3 books that I've read thus far have been queer, so, you know, happy Pride. Love that for me. Do I love that for them, though? Because it's horror, so the queer storylines in these 3 aren't the happiest. But yeah, it's really interesting to read the dynamic and our main character, Yoshiki, trying to deal with knowing that his best friend and this boy that he loved is taken over by this creature who's just using Hikaru's body. And it's like, imagining yourself in that situation, how horrific could that be? And it's like, the question is, if you knew someone you loved was taken over by a creature, but you love them, and you want them to be part of your life, would you let this strange creature thing in your house? Or would you pack your bags and move? I think I would have to move. I think I would have to move. But that's it for the manga bonus of this vlog. I will pick up this vlog and update you again once I start the final book, You Know What You Did. And I am excited to read a bit of a thriller to end this out. And hopefully it goes well. Hello, I'm doing my check-in for You Know What You Did. And the premise of this book is following Annie after her mom passes away. In the prologue, she finds her mother's body in the adjoined house to her property, and we start off with her kind of coping or attempting to cope with her mother's passing by kind of busying herself and doing other things, but her daughter and her husband are kind of telling her, like, the way you're coping isn't correct and you're not grieving the way that you should be. And one, I kind of don't like the way her family is so dismissive of her experience and feelings, and that could be the point of the book. So far, I'm only 14% into it, so I'm not sure if this is the point of her husband and her daughter being so grating. Like, her daughter's 14, and there are scenes thus far with her daughter that I'm like, God, you are so annoying. Like, are teenagers this frustrating? Like, I don't know. I haven't hung out with a teenager in that long. And my assumption is that she's going to explore the difficulties of motherhood in regards to her relationship with her own daughter. I feel like the way Annie's daughter, her name is Tabitha, the way Tabitha is characterized is just laying it on a little too thick for my liking. And also her husband feels like he's hung out on like psychology TikTok a little too long, because sometimes Annie will talk about frustrations and difficulties she's dealing with, and he always has this sort of enlightened, psychoanalyzed type of answer, and it's a little bit grating. Like, I just would like for Annie to be able to complain for like 3 seconds and it be over. But other than those two characters being annoying, not much is happening. It feels so much more domestic than it does thriller. There are glimpses of like flashbacks to when she found her mother's body, and like a little bit more detail from what the prologue had given us, and like that slowly unravels. And there's a moment where we flash back to like this hotel scene, and that hotel scene has really little to no detail. It's mostly like she knows that she's sleeping in a bed that's not her own. And then we flash back again to the present, and Annie seems to have this sort of trauma regarding a car crash. Whether she was in a car crash, she was the driver, no detail is clear. I don't know if I'm liking it at the 14% mark. I think because it's not fast paced, it's not as quick of a pace as I expect a thriller to be. I know this leans a little bit more psychological thriller because we are dealing with Annie spiraling, and she's not sure like if it's her symptoms of her OCD like being triggered because of her mom's passing, or if there's something else going on, but she is very frantic in her mental space. But even that isn't so on page yet. And it's a lot of her dealing with her daughter, which is very domestic and not even in like a creepy way. It's just her daughter's annoying, and she's trying to figure out how to like be on common ground with her 14-year-old daughter who's trying to be rebellious and who's like pushing her mother away and clinging more so onto her father. Yeah, so I'll check in when I get further into the book. I will say that it is easy to read, but it's quite dense, and that like this book is 367 pages, and like look at how much text is on the page. Like the font is small. So yeah, I will check in if I have anything else to say once I get to like the 30 or 50% mark. We'll see how much I get read today, but I'm not having that great of a time, I'll be honest. But I do hope that it picks up. I'm here to do a check-in at the 50% mark of You Know What You Did. I just got a little bit past part 2, and I think now the actual kind of like thrillery suspense section of the book has finally kicked in. We're not so focused on Annie's relationship with her daughter, because her daughter currently is at like a summer camp thing, which honestly I'm enjoying much more because her daughter was really, really grating on me. which, again, I think is the point, but I think you could repeat the kind of annoyance of her daughter so much to the point where it gets kind of tired. I'm a little bit surprised that I think maybe the 35 to 40% of this book was when that second plot point in the synopsis finally kicks in. And I think the reason why this thriller feels so much more slow burn to me is that a major plot point of her being suspect in an art benefactor's death doesn't come until like maybe the 40% mark. And so I was kind of just sitting here reading about her relationship with her husband and her daughter, and like her kind of avoiding coping with the death of her mother, and thinking like, when is this plot point going to come up? To me, I think this plot point may be the main aspect of the thriller, and more so her relationship with her mother is this sort of backstory being used to explain why Annie is reacting the way she does, and it's in a sense a layer of her character versus like her mother's death really being any part of the actual thriller or mystery that's happening here. But I don't know, it was like really weird because the way the prologue sets it up, it feels so much more like her mother's death is part of the mystery. And like now that I'm at the 50% mark, it seems like her mother's death seems like such a background thing, that like it was just an event that happened to her. It just seems like in the beginning it felt like such an active plot point, and then suddenly it paused and we're at a completely different section in that synopsis. And I'm wondering how much more deeply the two are tied together. And I hope it's not just a display of describing her generational trauma that she, in a sense, inherited from her mother. And I hope like that plot point comes back, and then that there's more explanation versus like, yeah, this is just a way for the author to describe her character while using somebody else versus like building out Annie's character with her presently. And I hope it doesn't come off like I'm being dismissive of like Annie's POV or anything. And it's not even about like repetition of her triggers. Like that part, I totally understand the point of repeating when she's triggered, because we are really put in the mindset of who Annie is as a character and her struggle with her OCD and her spiraling, and that laying on the idea that she may be an unreliable narrator. I don't mind that, but it's just like these certain facts and like new characters that we're introduced to or plot points that I'm just like, I don't see the point yet. So I hope at the 70% mark I see the point. Hello everyone, I have finished You Know What You Did, and I wanted to do a final check-in for this book. And I know that yesterday when I checked in at the 50% mark, I was feeling very like, not so great or positive about my read. And now that I've finished, I can say that this is a 3-star thriller for me, with so much more slow burn, because we really get to know the dynamics of Annie's family, like who her husband is to her, who her daughter is to her. But I find that the daughter element in this book wasn't that necessary for the overall plot and the thriller aspect. Like, I do understand that the daughter plot was more so about setting up Annie's characteristics and then having that in parallel to Annie's relationship with her own mother, but it didn't necessarily add to the thriller for me, if that makes sense. Not that I don't think the exploration of trauma and like, will she continue the cycle of generational trauma not being important, but because this is more so marketed as a thriller, I don't think that it adds to that specific plot point. And the thriller in this doesn't really start until, again, that like 50% mark, and then the pace starts really picking up. I think I said this in the last update as well. I just have a lot of pacing issues with this because there's a lot of very mundane moments, and there were times where I'm just like, how does this add to the thriller aspect? I think when it comes to the major thriller plot point of this book, it went really well. Like the pacing, I think, was well done. But I think that there was certain red herrings that were put in there. I don't think those red herrings were built 3D enough for me to be potentially convinced that it wasn't who I had already thought it was by the 50% mark. I don't think it was done poorly. I just don't think this genre of thriller is for me. And the genre I'm speaking of is like more domestic thriller. I think just the domestic life and the plotting and like setup for the domestic thriller, I'm just like, not to be that person, but I don't care about your husband. I don't really care about your bratty daughter. And I don't really care about your like friend's shitty husband. Like, I don't know how this adds up to the excitement of the thriller aspects of this book. But this just felt like, you know, we were in a slice of life with this mother, seeing her marriage fluctuate. And I kind of was like, so where are the thrills? But yeah, I would say that if you've been thinking about trying a domestic thriller, this could be something you could pick up. And if you're okay with a bit more of a character examination at the beginning and it being a little bit more slow burn, again, I will say it does pick up at that 50% mark. It just, my issue is that it takes that long for the pace to get along. I expect thrillers to have a pretty consistent pacing, and that can be because I more so have seen thrillers through visual media. But yeah, that's my final thoughts. But other than that, 3 stars. The other ones, I still can't think of a star rating yet. They may stay unrated, or when I close out this video, you'll see a rating. But that's a future me problem and not a present me problem. Alright, so I'm here to close out the video. I had an interesting time reading horror and thriller this week, and I will say that I have an official ranking, although I don't really have a star rating for all of my reads. The first place has to go to Chlorine. I think that one had such an impact on me, and I am still thinking about it, and I think I'm going to go to the bookstore and buy myself a physical copy. That sounds like something that would be nice, so I can go in and like annotate all my favorite parts of it and, you know, do the thing. And the second place in the ranking has to go to Bloom. Third place, I think, honestly, it's a tie between the last 2, Summer Hikaru Died, and You Know What You Did. I think they both had elements that were a little bit missing for me for it to be a new favorite or one that I think about or highly recommend. But I don't think either of them are bad books. I think with You Know What You Did, there was just certain plots that kind of fell through for me, and I think a little bit of editing in the plot to tighten up the storyline would have made it far more up my favorites list. But I am interested in reading more from KT Win whenever they decide to write another book. And Summer Hikaru Died, I find like a lot of manga that I read, the first volume is a nice introductory, but like it's not always my favorite volume, so I'm definitely going to go try out the next volumes and see how the story progresses. The art style really evokes horror for me. Yeah, this was a long video, and I thank you if you stayed all the way to the end. In the comments, leave a horror book you would suggest to a beginner horror reader. I am very surprised that I found a new favorite book that happens to be a horror, and two horrors that I think I will be thinking about for a long time and potentially could make my best book of the year list. But other than that, I will leave you now, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Again, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!